Hey everyone, and welcome to United Church Online. Back in August of 2020, I wrote a blog titled An Ethic of Love. It was my origin story of how Aaron reached out to me to come out to Seattle. I talked about what kept Seattle on my mind and my heart, and it was because of the philosophy of the type of church that Aaron and I talked about. We didn't want to start a church that's centered around a personality or a person. We didn't want to start a church that centered itself around a Sunday morning. We wanted to start a church centered around the ethic of love. We wanted to start a movement of radical revolutionaries who embedded themselves in their city and in their neighborhoods so that together we would courageously try what others claim cannot be done. And I'm really excited about where we're headed as a community. This next normal is one that we've been working towards for years. And in a lot of ways, it's who we set out to be from the onset, before this community even had a name. We are seeking to be a community that centers itself around an ethic of love, a community that seeks to be an active part of restoring broken relationships, the relationship with the self, one another, the people around us, and creation. We are seeking to be a community that challenges one another, that invites one another into spaces of community, and a community that never walks alone. Throughout the year of 2021, we have committed ourselves to re-Jesusing ourselves using the lectionary as our guide. And today, we are in Mark chapter 5. There is something happening all around us as a new world is being ushered in through Jesus. Relationships are being restored, identities restored, life restored. All around us, these pieces of heaven are breaking into the here and now, showing us what is to come, who we are in the process, and how we get to participate.
Gratitude to you for your goodness, for your kindness pierces time through. Let those who struggle speak this, for your kindness pierces time through. In my despair, I called on you, and you answered me like the sky. You are for me. I cannot fear, for what can a man do to me? You are for me. Embrace me. You are my strength and my song, my rescue. The voice of rejoicing and comfort rings through the tents of the upright, and your right hand upholds it. Exalts it. Your right hand upholds. I will not die. I will live to speak of what you do. You have laid me low for my errors, but never given me up. Open for me the gates of uprightness. I will enter them and give thanks. This is the gate that belongs to you, the gate the upright enter. I give thanks to you, for you have answered me. Become my rescue. The stone that the builders rejected is now become the cornerstone because of you, and it is miraculous to our eyes. This is the day you have made. In it we will be glad and rejoice. And we pray, send us happiness. Blessed is the one who comes in your name, whom we bless out of your house. You are our sovereign, our light. Bind the festival offering with cord. Bring it to the horns of the altar. For you are my sovereign, and I give thanks to you. You I exalt and praise. my gratitude throughout your goodness, for your kindness pierces time through.
And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be well and live." And he went with him, and a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garments. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion of people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside, and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the little girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat.
The moment Elliot was born, my whole world flipped upside down. Tracy's delivery was challenging. Nothing went the way that we had hoped or planned. She had been suddenly admitted into the hospital. The doctors were concerned for her health as well as Elliot's, and she had to be induced. While doctors seemed to come and go in and out of the delivery room as conversations and information were downloaded into our heads, a quiet chaos seemed to envelop us as we sat and as we waited, wondering what the course of action would eventually be. Hours stacked upon hours as Tracy struggled, and as the pain and agony and suffering grew more and more intense. And then, in the middle of the night, on July 20th, Elliot made her grand appearance into this world, and everything inside of me changed. I was both completely in awe of what Tracy had done. I was so unbelievably proud of her, but nothing had prepared me for that moment. None of the birthing videos from health class or even the birthing classes that we had gone through. I was surrounded by awe. And yet rushing at me like a sneaker wave, ready to drag me out to sea, was this wave of terror, flooding the inner being of my soul. Who was this child that I was responsible for? Who is this child that I must teach and care for? Who is this child that her life is upon my shoulders? When they say that having a child is like living with your heart outside of your body, they aren't kidding. For the first time in my life, that statement made sense. And soon it will make sense for two couples in our own community who are about to cross the threshold of parenthood. We couldn't be more happy for you guys. We're holding you in our prayers for the difficult journey you've been on to this moment and the many moments that lay ahead. We're with you. We're excited for you, and we love you. New life is bursting forth all around us. Let those who have eyes see. Having a child is like living with your heart outside of your body. I think this is why I identify so well with Jairus in our gospel passage today. If you're new to our community, we've been intentionally walking through the stories in the Gospels, the first 4 books in the New Testament of the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Contained there within are the stories of Jesus, of how he loved, how he thought, and how he responded and acted to the world around him. Our hope this year as a church is that by sitting in and situating ourselves in these stories every week, that we too would begin to look, love, and listen more and more like Jesus in our hearts, our minds, and our ways. This is what it means to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus, to simply be like Jesus more and more each and every day. Can you imagine how different your life would be if you looked more like Jesus? Can you imagine how different this church would be if we looked more like Jesus? Can you imagine how different this city would be, this country? I'm not sure my imagination can stretch that far, but if that's what it means to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," then I'm here for it. Anyhow, Jairus. As Talissa read for us earlier, Jairus was an official in the synagogue, one of the leaders, which meant that he had positional authority. He was a mover and a shaker, someone who could get things done. But here, in this moment, he was at a loss. He couldn't fix his daughter, his only daughter, his 12-year-old girl who was sick and near death. You see, Jairus had access. He was a part of the upper crust of society, and so he had the best health care that anyone could buy. He could access all of the doctors that he wanted, the best medicines and the best treatments that money and his position could buy and summon. And he would have. I get that. I mean, if you were in Jairus' position, wouldn't you do everything in your means to save your child? And here's the thing. Jairus has a bit of a backstory. His daughter is 12 years old, his only child, which wasn't unique, but also was not uncommon either. You see, in antiquity, during this time of Jesus, nearly a third of children who survived birth were dead by the age of 6. 2 of every 3 children died by the age of 6. And by the time they would have reached the age of Jairus' daughter, 60% would be dead. Infant mortality and childhood mortality rates were sky high, and Jairus and his wife must have felt like they had dodged the bullet of death her entire life, their only child, or perhaps their last child. Because if she's all they have left, it means then Jairus and his wife either struggled to conceive a second child, or they had watched helplessly as their other children perished in the gauntlet of life. I have friends who have lost children to rare diseases and cancers, some whose marriages haven't survived, and others who are shells of their former selves. Watching your own child die, watching the heart of your heart pass, I can't even imagine it. And here's Jairus, determined to never let that happen again. He's tried all of the medicines. He's worked his way through all of the doctors. He's determined that this time, his child will survive. And he can't allow his wife to go through the pain again. He himself isn't sure that he'll survive the trauma and suffering, the helplessness of losing yet another child. And so he turns to Jesus, this faith healer whose name and stories have gotten around town. I can imagine Jairus and his wife talking. "I heard that he was coming back by this way. I'll go find him in the morning and I'll bring him back. But Jairus, why would he listen to you? Who do you think I am, honey? I don't have power and privilege for nothing. This will work. This time, this will work. It just has to. I just believe it has to. And so early the next morning, Jairus makes his way to the shore to find Jesus, who at this point is already surrounded by a huge crowd. A mass of people have already come to see him, many of whom, too, are in search of a miracle. But Jairus is Jairus. Jairus is a community leader, and as he approaches, the crowds part. His leadership, his authority, and privilege on display. He doesn't have to push people aside. They simply part before him like the sea before Moses. But Jairus does something unexpected. He doesn't command Jesus to come with him. He doesn't lean into his authority and position and privilege. He drops all of that. He cedes it to Jesus, and in front of the entire community, in front of all of the people who go to him as their leader, he drops to his knees and he pleads with Jesus. My little daughter is dying, Jesus. Come, simply lay your hands on her so that she may live. A simple request, wrapped in an unbelievable gesture of faith. Jairus gave up everything for his daughter, even his authority and position and privilege, not in secret, not in a quiet back alley deal, not through subsidiaries and servants. No, Jairus himself went before Jesus and made himself nothing for the sake of his daughter. Jairus put his entire reputation on the line for his little girl. This will work, he thought to himself. This time, this will work. It just has to. I just believe it has to. I've always wondered about this part as Jesus acquiesces, as Jesus begins to follow Jairus home. You see, Scripture isn't very good at telling time. It's not all that concerned with a clock like we are. And I've always wondered, how long did Jesus and Jairus walk together? Was it a matter of minutes? Was it hours? Did Jairus pick up the pace in excitement and relief? Did he speed walk his way back home? And what did they talk about? Anything? Or did they stay silent the whole time? Did Jesus sort of ignore Jairus, or did they talk about the weather or God or life in general? I kind of think that Jesus asked Jairus to tell him about his little girl. Jesus asked Jairus to share some of his favorite stories about her, to reminisce with him the moments with her that made him smile or laugh, memorable moments of love and joy that marked his days. I think Jesus made Jairus and his relationship with his daughter the center of the universe for the next hour or so, laughing with him, smiling with him, being touched by the love they shared, the hopes and dreams that he had for her. The whole time, Jairus entertaining the large crowd, each person hearing the love that he had for his daughter, what parental love, fatherly love for their child could look like. When suddenly Jesus stopped. Have you ever been in one of those spaces where everyone was having a good time and laughing, and one person simply changes the entire mood with one action? Jesus simply stopped dead in his tracks with this look of concern on his face, and everyone followed suit. This mass of people looked at each other and simply wondered, what's wrong? What happened here? I can imagine Jairus continued on ahead for a few feet before stopping and realizing that something was amiss. Hey, Jesus, it's just up this way a bit more. We're almost there, he'd say jovially as his joy and anticipation slowly turned to concern, his face dropping as he took a couple of steps towards Jesus to grab him by the arm and cajole him to keep coming. My daughter, Jesus, remember? But Jesus stands there for a moment as the crowd presses in on him. Who touched me? He asked the crowd. In a scene reminiscent of The Office where Jim turns to the camera with that look, I can imagine the disciples doing the same. Seriously, Jesus? Are you kidding me right now? There are people everywhere. Of course someone touched you. I almost see them trying to push him on, like Jairus, grabbing his arm to take him on ahead. Come on. But he resists. He won't budge. He plants his feet firmly and makes the crowd wait. He makes Jairus wait. You see, this large crowd would have been made up of people from the community, people who knew each other. And as the crowd stopped, her means of escape faded with it. She couldn't simply slow down and allow the crowd to walk on by. She was trapped, and soon her identity would be revealed. You see, this unnamed woman in the crowd would have been well known. She was one of those people. But she wasn't always that way. There had been a day when she had been one of them, but no longer. And knowing that there was no way of escape, knowing that she was trapped, with fear and trembling, she pulled the scarf down from her face and confessed, "I did it. I touched you." You could hear the crowd gasp. This woman, this unclean woman, this woman who had been cast out from her community for her disease, her illness, she touched Jesus? You see, this was forbidden by the law, and the punishment was severe. But she just had to do it because this will work, she thought to herself. This time, this will work. It just has to. I believe it has to. And again, time is of no concern in Scripture, but we know an awful lot about this woman in the telling of the story by Mark. How do we get those details if for not her telling them her story? And so in this moment, I see Jesus taking her by the hand and pulling her near. More murmurs rising from the crowd. "Let's sit down," Jesus invites. "Tell me your story." "Sit down?" Jairus screams in his head. "Sit down? But what about my daughter? What about her? She is literally dying, and we're sitting here for this woman who has been cast out of our community." You can see Jairus just standing there as everyone around him takes a seat on the ground. Jairus stays standing in protest for a few moments, but eventually takes his seat, seething underneath. 12 years ago, Jesus. Jairus starts patting his foot on the ground in frustration and anxiety as he thinks to himself, 12 years? Do we really need the whole backstory? Let's get on with this thing. More than 12 years ago, Jesus, my husband died. We lived at the pinnacle of society. We had money and were well known, but after he died and left me everything, I came down with this illness, this hemorrhaging, this bleeding that would not stop. I went to every doctor I knew, both here and beyond. I traveled to find someone who could treat me, someone who could make it all stop. Every last penny. I used every last penny. And for over a decade now, I have been cast out of this community. I have been disinvited from friends, from family gatherings. But most of all, I've been disinvited from the temple. I have been cast out as a part of the people of God. You see, this woman's illness and disease made her not only unclean, but ceremonially unclean, meaning she wasn't allowed to not only enter the temple courts to participate in worship, she wasn't allowed in anyone's home. She wasn't even allowed to sit on a chair because that chair would then be unclean. They would literally destroy the chair after she sat on it. Her uncleanliness was transferable. Her illness could infect you with the disease of otherness. She was a castaway, no longer welcome anywhere, cut off completely from family, friends, and her people. She was as alone could be. But Jesus, I just knew that this would work. This time, this will work. It just has to. I just believe it has to. And so I reached out to touch your garment because I knew that you would make me well. And here in this moment, everyone is gathered around, listening to her, listening to her story, listening to her suffering. In this moment, a crowd is hearing her voice for the first time, her experience for the first time. And here in this moment, Jesus is creating space. Jesus is giving space for her to vocalize her suffering. A woman who has been silenced for a dozen years has been given her voice. And as she finishes her story, As she says everything she needs to say, I can see her weeping and looking around at all of the people who hear her. And Jesus lets that moment just sink in. He lets that sacred silence ring out loud before he says, "Daughter, daughter, your faith has made you well." She moves from an unnamed, unknown woman to a named and known daughter whose experiences and suffering and trauma have been given life through her voice. Daughter. Which is such a beautiful move, right? Because here we have Jairus, who has come to pull Jesus in his direction, who has come for his own daughter's well-being. And while I think Jesus looks directly at the woman, while I think Jesus actually moves towards her to embrace her as he says, "Daughter," while I think it was for her benefit, I too think it was for the benefit of Jairus. Jesus is saying to Jairus, "This is my daughter." This woman who has suffered for 12 years, who has been put out by the community, who has been outcast, is my daughter. All that you feel for your little girl who is sick and dying, I feel for her. And how she has been treated is unconscionable. Jairus, you have the power and authority, and I know you laid it down in front of me, but you are still the beneficiary of a tremendous amount of privilege. Your privilege allowed you to get the crowd to part to get to me. Your privilege allowed you all of the doctors and healers you could find. Your privilege allowed you the financial flexibility to do what you've done. While you've laid it down before me, it still resides in you because of your position. And so how will you use that privilege for my daughter? How will you use that privilege for all of my daughters? How will you use that privilege for my children? And I think Jesus asks that of each of us as well. We have a tremendous amount of privilege, whether financial privilege, positional privilege, racial privilege. And I think Jesus is asking us, how are you using that privilege for my daughter, for my children? You see, the kingdom of God is not exclusionary. It's not a space for the select few. It's a space for everyone, a wide open space, as the psalmist says, a space where there is more than enough room for all, a space where we use our privilege and our power to make room for those who have none, actively activating our power and privilege for others. The moral theologian James Keenan has recently been challenging me and my understanding and concept of sin. Sin. It's a word that we oftentimes hate to use because of how it's been used against us. A word that triggers us, that causes us pain and makes us recoil as we recall how it's been used to silence us, to push us into submission of a system and way of being that we're told looks like Jesus, but stands diametrically opposed to his heart, mind, and ways. Keenan puts it this way: sin is the failure to bother to love. Sin is the failure to bother to love. So Jairus, how have you hidden your power and privilege? Jesus exposed to Jairus his sin, that he had failed to bother to love his daughter through his privilege, Jesus' daughter through privilege. And I think he's asking us the same, united. How have you hidden your power and privilege? How have we failed to bother to love? I want to leave us with that question. I know it's a challenging question, a painful question, and there isn't really a happy ending in this moment, but how have we failed to bother to love? We started this church a little over 3 years ago upon the hope of love, the foundation of love, an ethic of love, to see and be the people of Jesus in how we love, in how we think, and in how we live, in the heart, mind, and ways of Jesus. And every so often, it's good to check in. How have we failed to bother to love? Maybe another way of asking it, How has love been too inconvenient for us to attempt? Jesus, in this space, looks to Jairus as Jairus' servants come rushing forward. Jairus, don't bother the teacher any longer. Your daughter is dead. All hope was sucked out of the sky. Listening and hearing to this woman squashed any chances that his daughter had to life. She was now just another statistic. But Jesus looks to him. Just believe. Or put another way, just watch how I use my privilege for her sake. Together, they finished the journey towards Jairus' house, a different tone and tenor to the atmosphere. As they descended upon the home, a crowd of mourners wailing in the streets over the death of Jairus' daughter. I can imagine that Jairus was completely overcome with grief. Just watch how I use my privilege for her sake. As Jesus enters into the home with Jairus, his wife, and his disciples, he raises her back to life. How are you using your privilege? How are you creating? How are you breathing new life and grace into everything and everyone we touch? How are we creating and breathing new life and grace into everything and everyone we touch? May we be a people who bother to love. May we be a people who use our privilege for the sake of others. May we be a people who stretch out our hand, who stretch our imaginations, who stretch out our hearts to create the change that others claim cannot be done. May we be a people who bother to love. Amen.
Let us love, comes the invitation from the beloved community. A community following Jesus so long that defined their whole beings by it. Let us love little children. They encouraged each other as if this love was something that was yet unknown and needed to be practiced, like a baby carefully watching the footsteps of others until she finally discovers her own feet can move in this way, wobbly and imperfect, but still walking, still following in the way. Let us love little children, not in word or in speech, but as if our whole bodies are learning this new grace. Let us be bold in learning this new movement, for we will falter, and it won't be perfect, just as we are not perfect. Little children, it will feel new and awkward, and it should. It should feel strange to twist and turn our bodies into love's possibility, to learn how to love in the way of Christ, who is still trying to encourage us to love one another. Let this be what defines us now, in this moment. Not so that they will know that we are Christians, but so that we know who that God's love abides. God's love abides in me. God's love abides in you. I am in you, and you are in me, and this changes everything. That is our prayer right now, that we will come to believe enough that God's love abides in us and be so changed. O Christ, may it be so.
As we start to work towards the next normal, we have established a new rule and rhythm of a monthly in-person micro-gathering, and we're expanding that to twice a month. We aren't yet able to meet indoors or weekly due to space issues, but we will continue to meet in person outside on the first and third Sundays of the month. July 4th will be our next all in-person gathering, and I'm really excited about where we're headed as a community. This next normal is one that we've been working towards for years, and in some ways, many of us have been deconstructing and reconstructing towards this next normal for even longer, 3, 5, even 10 plus years. We are seeking to be a community that centers itself around an ethic of love. A community that seeks to be an active part of restoring broken relationships, the relationship with the self, one another, the people around us, and creation. We are seeking to be a community that challenges one another, that invites one another into spaces of community, and a community that never walks alone. Every Sunday, following this video premiere, we host a Sunday Circle, and this is an opportunity to process the morning, to ask questions, bring insight, and get to know people who call United their home. You can find the link to the Zoom meeting in the description of the video. Every week now, for over 3 years, we've closed with the same benediction, and we do this in an effort to remind ourselves of who we are striving to be as a community. May you be blessed today by these words. May God bless you with discomfort, at easy answers, hard hearts, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may seek truth boldly and live from deep within your heart where God's Spirit dwells. May God bless you with anger, at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears, to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that we may reach out our hand in comfort and turn their pain into joy. May God bless you with foolishness, to believe that through Jesus Christ we'll have the strength and power necessary to create change in this world and in our neighborhoods, so that together we will courageously try what others claim cannot be done. May God bless you with remembrance, that we are called to continue God's redemptive work of love and healing in God's place, in and through God's name, in God's Spirit, continually creating and breathing new life and grace into everything and everyone we touch. Let it be so. Be in peace, and God bless. Kept Seattle on my mind and my heart, and it was because of the philosophy. We didn't want to start a church that centered. We wanted to. Oh my God.
None of the birthing classes from health class or even the birthing classes I was surrounded by. Dang it, let me start over. I blew it. I missed the words.
And go put it on the fridge and live. And he went. While he was still speaking, there came from the. What the? Some who said. Okay, I promise I can do this. The heat's getting to me.